Hare Krishna. I thought I was still in Europe, and I thought we're going to give class at 12:15. And I just realized that in America, it's 6:15. And now it's 6:30 something, 6:33 or 6:34. So I just wanted to let you all know that we still will have class, and I just have to set up. Right now I'm outside. See that behind me? That's the moon. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, the moon is there. The moon is rising. Yeah, I'm sorry. We were giving, when I was in Europe, we were giving class. This time was 12:15 or 11:15. So I have to set up. So just allow me to set up. Then we're going into my office. There's the door. There's the key. You have a light over there. Yes, it's like a movie, right? Sun is rising. There we go. And I was thinking, oh, what story are we going to read today? What story am I going to study? And then when I was chatting my rounds, I realized, oh my Govinda, it's time to give class. With this bright light above my head. So, we were giving class yesterday. I don't know if you all heard it. And I was explaining a formula. And I think it's really important. And therefore, I think we're going to give class about this formula. What do you think? Is that okay? You have no choice. It must be okay, right? So, I think maybe I'll even write this. You will hear it better. You can hear it better, right? Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Yes? Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Okay. What I am thinking, that light is so bright. I wonder if there's a way to. The camera is, I don't know, it's adjusted for outside. It doesn't realize it's inside. So, I'm going to get a piece of paper and I'm going to write the formula down, and then I want to explain it. This is a surprise for you. This is my four-step process to solving any problem. It's called feel it. No. Face it. First step is face it, and I'll explain it. The next step is feel it. The next step is deal with it. And the last step is do it. And I'm writing it down and I'm going to show you. I'm going to explain this. This is, can you see this? Or it's so, the camera is adjusted for outside light. You can't even see this, can you? Can you? I can't see it. I haven't. Okay, we're going to try something else. Change the lighting. I don't know if it'll. Okay, it's better, right? Let's see if you can see it. I don't think you can see it, can you? No. All right. I'll say it again. You may want to write this down. Face it. This is how you deal with a problem. Number one is you face it. And I'll explain all this, but you can write this down. Gurunishta, you can write it down. Face it. Step one, face it. Step two, feel it. Step three, deal with it. And step four, do it. Face it, feel it, deal with it, do it. Now, the first step, face it, feel it, deal with it, do it. FFDD. Yeah. So, the first step, face it, feel it, deal with it, do it, yeah. I want to explain, it's quite interesting. The first step is to acknowledge the problem. Just as it is. This is the problem. You know, sometimes you have a problem, but you don't acknowledge it. You like pretend it's not a problem. Have you ever done that? Or the opposite, you have a problem and you think it's much worse than it actually is. Of course, we've seen that, you know. A lot of people exaggerate their problems. They're not as bad as they tell you they are. And some people have problems that they won't admit. So the first step is you acknowledge it as it is, not more than it is, not worse than it is. But less than it is. So it's more common when you have a problem, you don't recognize it, or you don't recognize the depth of it, or you don't recognize it at all. So you have that experience, like you have a personal problem, personal issue, maybe you don't realize you have. Someone might say, you know, you're like this. No, I'm not. Or you have a tendency for this. No, I don't. So this formula came up in the forgiveness workshop. You know, some people think, oh, I don't really have an issue, when actually they have about 150 issues. If they actually sat down, they'd realize I have an issue with this person, this company, this political leader, this temple, this leader. They had little issues with so many people. So it came up in regards to forgiveness, resentment, but it could come up in any situation. Like I was just doing a marriage workshop, and I was telling the devotees that a lot of us in our marriages think, as long as we're not having fights, or as long as there's nothing like that's obviously wrong, then we think everything's fine. I have a feeling this lens got dirty. Can I have your permission to clean it? I said, something is wrong. It's so blurry. Hold on, excuse me. I don't know if that's going to make a difference, but did that make a difference? It did. The lens was dirty. So, sometimes in a marriage things are really wrong, but one of the partners doesn't admit it, and one of the partners thinks everything's right. Or like if you go to a japa workshop, you may realize that your japa is worse than you thought, because you learn all the things that you should be doing or could be doing that you're not doing. And so you do it during the japa workshop or retreat, and your japa is much better. And then you realize how bad it was before. So sometimes we don't realize the problem now. Sometimes we don't realize the problem for a long time, like 10 years or 20 years or our whole life. There's some people that they don't know they're not Krishna conscious, they don't know they're God conscious, and they'll never know. And they don't know they're not the body, and they'll never know. So, and some of us have realized something about ourselves, maybe this year, that we didn't realize our entire lives. We may be 30, 40 years old. So you can say it took us 30, 40 years, and when you're older, you'll realize something about yourself. And it took you that long to realize you had a specific problem. Now, one of the most interesting things I've ever heard, and we can apply it to this situation, is that somebody said, I don't know who, I don't remember, he said, but one of the measurements of a successful organization is a measurement of time between their awareness of a problem and when they begin to work on the solution, or how long it takes them from awareness to solve a problem. How long it takes them from awareness to begin solving the problem, and how long it takes them to solve it. That time determines this. It's one determinant of a successful organization. Once you realize you have a problem, how long will it take you to work on it? And if you look at our movement, sometimes we realize we have problems and we don't really work on them for about 20 years. Somehow we don't think it's significant, or due to lack of resources, or whatever the situation may be. I think a lot of us who've been around a while realize that we had problems in the 90s that we're only addressing now. But this morning I was thinking there's something, so we can go to the first stage and say the same thing. The measurement of the success of an organization is how long it takes them from the time the problem exists to realize, to acknowledge that they actually have the problem. Because the time it takes from acknowledging to working on it won't happen until you first acknowledge. So I think you can use both those as metrics. And you could use this whole formula as a metric. How long does it take to realize the problem? That's a measurement of your success. And then how long does it take before you're going to deal with the problem? That's your next measurement of success. Deal with it means you're actually going to come up with a strategy, then do it means you're going to execute it. So how long does it take for each stage to develop? Now, how does that relate to us? They ask you a measurement of our success, or how we will progress in our life, either materially or spiritually, because it's the same principle that you apply it materially or spiritually. And we need often to apply it to material situations where we may need to improve ourselves materially in our service or in our life, which indirectly would affect our service. So you have a problem. How long does it take before you become aware of that problem? That's a measurement of how quickly you will progress in life. Because if it takes you a long time to realize you have a problem, that means that problem is somewhat handicapping you. We'll get to the feel it in a minute. So, I was working on this last night, actually, for a new book we're writing, secret book, best-selling book. And I have a mantra for each. I don't know if I can remember each mantra yet. But think of it, think of your life, and think of some problem that you've become aware of, that you have, that you weren't aware of last year or the year before or 10 years ago, or perhaps perhaps you've had this problem since you were a child and you weren't aware of it. And now you're just becoming aware of it. So that's all those years you've had to live with that problem, and you can see that that problem handicaps you in some way. Depends on the problem. If it's in some cases, let's say, for example, you have a problem with trust. Usually you have a problem with trust. Either you brought it into this life because of something that happened in the past life, or something that happened in this life, usually when you were younger, and it caused you not to trust people. In some way you were let down, or some situation like that. So let's say you don't trust people, and you don't know why, and you're not even aware that it's really a problem, or that you're aware you can do anything about it. And as Hoxha just says, 40 years, yeah, but that's common. It might take you 40 years to realize you have a problem. So now, let's say you don't trust people, so you don't really have any good relationships, and then you become a devotee, and you're having trouble trusting devotees, and then you want to have a spiritual master, and you're having trouble finding who could be your spiritual master because you don't trust people because of something that happened back. And you're not really acknowledging this is really a problem, and you have to do something about it. So you can see how much of a problem it is if we have a problem and we don't acknowledge it, and that goes on for years and years. So the first stage, face it, means to acknowledge it. And sometimes we don't want to acknowledge it because there are many reasons we don't want to acknowledge it. Sometimes it's just ignorance. We don't even realize we have a problem. But it's kind of interesting. If you think about a problem that you've become aware of, just ask yourself, has anyone ever told me, before I became aware of it, has anyone ever told me that I have this problem and I just wrote them off? I didn't believe them. That's possible. Were there indications in your life that made it kind of obvious that you had the problem that you didn't notice? It could be. Or were you trying to be somebody or achieve some things, and acknowledging this problem would kind of ruin your personal image, or you feel it would ruin the goals that you had? It somehow didn't fit with the goals you had, because a person who has those goals wouldn't have that problem. So you didn't want to acknowledge you had the problem because that would kind of ruin your image. You can think of various reasons, and I think one of the biggest reasons is that the false ego is so big and the false ego is so powerful that sometimes it's just hard for us to admit that we actually have this problem. We don't see ourselves as a person that would have this problem. For example, you see yourself as an honest person, but let's say your dealings are not always honest. That would be really difficult for you to acknowledge that your dealings aren't honest if you have always seen yourself as an honest person. And whether it's honesty or whether it's any quality, then it's virtually impossible for us to acknowledge a problem if we have a concept of ourselves as a person who couldn't possibly have that problem. Like I'm a spiritual person, or I'm a religious person, so I couldn't have such and such problem. But the fact is, I do have that problem. But I can't see it, I can't acknowledge it, because I don't see myself within the context of a person who has that problem. And sometimes we'll see another person who has that problem, and it will upset us. We'll say, look at that person, look what they're doing, that's so bad. And if it really upsets us, there's a good chance we have that problem, because we're resonating on a subconscious level, and it's disturbing us. Somehow or other, either I forgot to take my allergy medicine, or it's so bad it didn't work. It's been working every day, except this morning. I don't have a dirty with me. So I have to use my hand, excuse me. It's not that bad. So we've talked about this before, cognitive dissonance. You think of if you think of yourself in a particular way, that I'm this kind of person, then when you act contrarily, you don't notice it. Everyone else notices it, but you don't notice it because it doesn't fit within the conception you have of yourself. Does that make sense? I think I'm such and such I'm an honest person, I'm a genuine person, I'm a trustworthy person. Whatever it is that you frame yourself within that ideal, I'm a good husband, I'm a good father, I'm a good wife, I'm a good mother, I'm a good disciple, I'm a good temple president, I'm a good this or that. I'm not saying you're not. I'm saying, but if you are not, and you frame yourself within a context that you are, how difficult will it be to see that you're not? It's virtually impossible because you've like created a fence around you. Well, I'm a good this or I'm a good that. Now, this formula, right? The question is, as you go through it, how long is it going to take you to face it? But then how long is it going to take you to feel it, to allow yourself to experience the painful emotion? And then how long from that is it going to take you to deal with it? Deal with it means to make a plan. Okay, what are we going to do? And then how long is it going to take you from the time you have the plan to actually do it? Now, obviously, wouldn't it be amazing if we lived our life in such a way that we had very keen self-awareness, so keen that we were extremely aware of our problems, or we were extremely open for others to tell us about our problems, and we could immediately embrace it? Wouldn't that be amazing? Because then we could start working on it. Do you know anybody, or perhaps you have this problem yourself, where you or they are very resistant to acknowledge your problem? So you say, I think it would be better if you do it. No, I don't do it like that. What are you talking about? That's not me. I mean, I know other people do that, but I don't do that. When to the person who's telling you, it's obvious that that's what you do. So self-awareness, or the ability to take feedback, how powerful is that? How important is that? But when ego gets in the way, and also lots of fear of the second step, of feeling it, because if I think I'm great, and I admit or become aware I'm not as great as I thought in a particular area, or I have to accept that I have a defect, which I thought I didn't have, and this defect really bothers me when I see it in other people. How difficult will that be for me to acknowledge? But what I'm saying, and this is really, really, really powerful, really, really important. What I'm saying is that if we can come to a point in our lives where we can acknowledge a problem, like immediately, as soon as it's brought to our attention, or as soon as someone says, I think you should do this, or your husband or wife says, you're like this, but I think that's really harming you, or your spiritual master says, you're like this, or you do this, or you make bad judgment in this area. Or sometimes Krishna, have you ever had this experience? Krishna reveals to you a problem, but you forget, or you just don't want to deal with it, or you put it on the shelf. Just imagine how much better your life would be if you were open to acknowledging your problems and completely open to working on them. So it was a seamless process that whenever you became aware of a problem, you would think, thank you, awareness of another problem, and you would get to work on it. So you'd be going through this. Here's the powerful point, because I have experience of this. I'm speaking totally from experience. This whole formula, I didn't read it anywhere. I learned aspects, I learned little tidbits, over the years, but it wasn't anybody wrote it this way. But just imagine what your life would be like if you were completely open internally for Krishna's guidance, and immediately, without ego, just this state of humility, you could just accept, yeah, I have this problem, and face it. And just face it as it is. Whether it comes internally or externally, or it's just obvious, but you've been avoiding it. And you face it exactly as it is. Because facing it as it is something that a lot of us have difficulty with. We oh yeah, it's a problem, but it's really not so bad. Or as I said, oh, it's so bad I can't do anything. It's not so bad, we really don't have to do it. So either way, you don't do anything because you think it's not that bad, it'll go away, or it's so bad I can't do anything. Isn't it? You have this experience? I have this experience, totally. So I'll get to your comments, but I gotta finish my train of thought. So I don't know if you realize this, but that people who are extremely successful, whether it's spiritually or materially, they are this stage one, they're like that. They're just like, as soon as somebody points it out, they're like, thank you. And why are they like that? Because they realize that they have so many things to work on, and to become aware of something to work on means there's something that's holding me back that now I can deal with and I can solve. And the more quickly I solve it, the more quickly that burden is left for me, and therefore the more quickly I can move forward towards my goals. And you can say the same thing about all four stages of the process. Let's go to the face it. Let's go to the feel it. Sometimes you don't want to go to the face it because you're going to start to feel it on the face it stage, and you'll feel like a complete failure, or you'll just feel depressed, or there's so many emotions you may feel that are extremely uncomfortable. Let's say someone who has a lot of respect for you finds that you've done something that's not honorable, and they tell you. Well, how hard is it going to be for you to embrace that? And as I said, you feel yourself as a very honorable person, a person with high integrity, and they point out an action where you exhibited virtually no integrity. Now, how hard is it for you to feel that? Because now you feel like a total failure. And this is a horrible feeling, to feel like a failure. Especially, it's a horrible feeling to feel that you failed in something that's so important for you, that you regard as one of your prime values, isn't it? I mean, how difficult is it to experience that? This is something I put on a pedestal, and now I have to face the reality that I don't do that. How does that feel? Who wants to go there? That's very difficult, isn't it? Extremely difficult. But just imagine you're in a position where you're completely open, no ego, you're completely open to look at your mistakes, to look at what you have to do, to look at the situation as it is. This is how it is. It's not how you think it is. It's much worse than you think it is. Or maybe it's better than you think it is. Maybe you're on the other end of it where you think everything is bad and it's not actually bad. That, for some people, that's hard. But as funny as that sounds, their situations are better than they think they are, and it's hard for them to acknowledge that it's better. They tend to think so low, they have such a bad opinion of themselves. They think it's worse. So imagine you're in this position now. Just imagine, maybe you can't imagine, but try to imagine. You're in this position where someone says, I really thought you were a trustworthy person, but I see that a lot of times you've let me down. And you're thinking, you're a very trustworthy person. That's your ego, your self-image. Now imagine you could immediately say, really, tell me about it. What do I do? And you're totally eager to learn. What am I doing? Because I'm not aware that I'm doing that. And you say, well, you do this and you do that. And there's no defense there. You simply want to learn. What am I doing?
And then you're ready to go to the next stage and just feel it. Say, how does that feel? I let down myself. I thought I was a person of integrity. How does that feel? It feels horrible. But I have to, if I don't allow myself to feel it, you know what happens? I stop there. I can't get to the third stage unless I go through the feeling stage, because once I allow myself to feel this horrible feeling of what it feels like to have let myself down, then I'm able to work through this problem and process it. And if I don't get through that second stage, I'll always stop. But even if I acknowledge it, I won't go beyond that, because I can't move into the third stage if I can't move into the second stage where I feel it, because I won't be able to deal with it, because the emotion around it is so debilitating, it's so unpleasant that I can't deal with it. You know, sometimes your spouse will say, we need to talk about something, and the partner will say, I don't want to talk about it, because it's not so painful to remedy the situation as it is to acknowledge the situation and to feel it. Does that make sense? So we have to develop the muscle, we have to learn the muscle to be able to experience the emotion. Now, what we do as a natural psychological mechanism is suppress the emotion. And so stage 2 is just the opposite. And because when you suppress the emotion, it affects stage 1. Because the suppressed emotion makes you think, it's not really a big problem. It's not, maybe you think it's not really a problem, you know, it doesn't really bother me. But what you've done is you suppressed your emotion around it, because it is such a problem that if you faced it, you feel like you might go crazy, or you feel like you couldn't deal with it. So you suppress the emotion as a survival mechanism, or you deny the problem. No, it's not a problem. And said, if it's not a problem, I won't have any negative emotion connected with the problem. So denial of the problem is also a mechanism of suppression of the emotion. If it's not a problem, why would I have an emotion around it? But it actually is a problem, but I deny it. And so now I feel fine, you know. I'm honest. What are you talking about? I'm an honest person. I'm always honest. I don't know what you're saying. You're making this up. You know, you don't know me. You know, how can you say such things? That's not kind. I thought we were friends, and so on. So you go into denial. Now you in denial, you don't have to acknowledge the problem, and you don't have to experience the emotion. And I'll give you an example. In our forgiveness workshop, we ask people to work on a resentment issue. And some people obviously have a big issue, and that's why they're there. But some people, they're just interested in the topic and they want to explore it. And so they didn't really know necessarily they were going to be working on an issue. They thought we were just going to be talking and discussing the topic of forgiveness. They really didn't understand how it was going to go. So they kind of get caught off guard a little bit. And so they're thinking of someone they have to forgive, and they're not really sure there is anybody. And so a lot of times they'll say, well, you know, I have this issue, but I'm not really sure it's an issue. It's really a big thing. I don't know if this is something that I need to deal with. In most cases, the issue is much bigger than they think it is, but they have not wanted to acknowledge it, because by acknowledging it, it means they're acknowledging a defect in themselves. Because if there's a problem in a relationship, you are in the relationship, so there's something about you that's involved with the problem. And so a lot of times we might just want to say, well, it's the other person's problem, it's not me, and I had nothing to do with it. So it's not really a problem. So what we found, this is just my experience teaching, what I would always say is, well, if this was innocent, I didn't understand it the way I understand now, I would say, well, if you think it's a problem, just deal with it. Because I wanted them to choose an issue that's real for them in their life. So I would just say, well, if you think that's an issue, then work on that, because that's all you have to work on. If you don't have any real resentment issue, and this is just a little thing, at least it's something, and then you can learn the forgiveness process by applying it to this person, and they say, okay, that makes sense. So the first exercise we do, or the first exercise we do is a face it. Just what is the problem as it is. Just let's look at what happened. Why do you have an issue with this person? But the next exercise is the feel it, and we do a few feel it exercises. And the next exercise is your partner plays the person you're trying to forgive, the person you have an issue with, and then you tell the person exactly how you feel. You don't describe what happened, you describe how you feel. You did this, it made me feel this way, and then when this happened, I felt this way. Of course, there's some description of what happened, but it's more, you're more expressing how you feel, and you ruined my chances to achieve this because I was handicapped because of what happened, and I developed this resentment for you because I saw you as my enemy, because my life went downhill because of this, and I feel like you're the cause of my misery, etc. So it's all about feeling. So this exercise forces the person to feel emotions that they may have repressed. So what often happens is the person who wasn't sure that they really had an issue, but I asked them, just if you don't know you have an issue, at least choose that person and choose that so-called issue. After they do this exercise, the person says, I didn't realize how deep an issue this was until I did this exercise. So why is that? Because they had whatever emotion they had with that issue, they suppressed it. Or because they never thought it was an issue, they had no emotion to connect. They couldn't get to the emotional stage that surrounded the issue because they didn't acknowledge the issue. Or they did acknowledge it was a problem, but they didn't acknowledge how deep the problem was, and therefore they had so little emotion around it. Or they didn't want to deal with it because maybe it's a very close friend or relative, so they didn't want to acknowledge it. So whatever emotion they had around it, they suppressed it. And so by doing this exercise, the emotion would come up, how they were feeling, that it was much, they'd all say, God, the emotion, that feeling is much stronger than I thought. But the pain that this person caused me was much greater than I thought it was. So because we have this natural mechanism to avoid pain, we'll tend to suppress painful emotions. And it's part of the reason that we won't go to step one, because we know, consciously or subconsciously, if I acknowledge the problem, there's a lot of pain around the problem that I'm going to feel. So better if I just say, oh, it's not really a problem, or don't worry about it, it's not a big thing, then consequently there'll be no painful emotion around it. So step 1 and 2 kind of are connected, because step 2 is around the corner of step 1. So wouldn't it be interesting? Imagine your life that you are now in a position where you actually want to become aware of your problems. Because you realize that the sooner I become aware of my problems, the sooner I can work on it. Wouldn't that be amazing? So anyone who's coming to you saying, Prabhu, Mataji, I think this and that, you're like, maybe you won't agree with them, but you're totally open. Okay, so what you're saying is this, and I do that, and I don't see how I do that. Can you explain it? And you might say, well, I did that only once because this situation, I don't do it all the time. They go, oh, okay, maybe you're not like that. Or you might say, yeah, I do that all the time. Thank you for pointing that out. In either case, you're open to consider, do I do that? Is that me? You're not like, no, you're just fault finding, or you do that also, or I don't do it so much, or that was, everybody does that, why are you picking on me? You're not like that, but rather you're the opposite, and you're saying, really, I do that, tell me more, I want to learn about that, because you understand this principle. The time it takes to become aware of something And the time it takes to go into the next stage, feeling it, will determine the time that I can start thinking about the solution. So now you're in this consciousness where I want to be able to go through these 4 stages in like 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. So I'm speaking from experience, my experience, because I had to learn this process to deal with many things in my life, because I could see I had problems that were blocking me from achieving something, and I just had to confront, oh, this is the problem, this is how it is, this is the feeling with it, and then we have to make a plan, like, your daily planner, you plan so many things. Well, part of your plan is how I'm going to deal with this problem, and then an execution of it. So I had to learn this. Now, imagine you have this ability to go through these 4 stages in like 3 minutes. So I tell you, Ananda Swarup Prabhu, you have this problem. And Ananda Swarup, that used to be Alejandro, Ananda Swarup, he says, really, tell me about it. You say, well, I can see that you have a lot of hesitancy to do this. And this thing you need to be doing because it's blocking you from advancing in your Krishna consciousness, or it's harming your relationships, or it's harming relationship with your spouse, or so I see something very clearly. And Ananda Swarup says, I never noticed that, but tell me more. I want to understand it. So he's completely open to it. Why is he completely open to it? Because he's in the mood that he wants to improve himself. And so it doesn't, because he wants to improve, his false ego just goes to sleep. So he's anxious to learn. I want to know. Well, he might say, I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking that's a problem. Thank you for pointing that out. It confirms that I'm on the right track. Tell me more about it. What is it? So you might think, wow, this is really strange that we want to know about our problems. But if you have a disease, wouldn't you want the doctor to tell you? Don't you go to the doctor to find out? And you want to know exactly what it is? So you have some pain in your finger. Okay, doctor, tell me exactly what it is. Do you want him to tell you something it isn't so you'll feel better? Well, there's nothing wrong with your finger. It'll go away. When in fact there is something wrong and it's not going to go away. And if years later that problem is worse, you would be upset because the doctor didn't tell you the actual problem and give you the cure, right? So it's kind of like that. It's like you're so open to improving yourself that you're so much more self-aware, and or it's easy for you to accept when someone points out a problem or a defect, or at least it's easy for you to consider. Sometimes someone might be wrong. Maybe they think it's a problem that really isn't, but at least you're willing to consider. You're willing to consider because you are anxious to improve. And you're not going to allow your false ego, right, to get in the way. That's the point. So, now just imagine your life, these 4 steps. Face it as it is, just like, which is hard, because false ego gets, no, it's not like that, Barbara, I don't do that all the time. No, that just happened once. And so you go into denial immediately, false ego, no, you're perfect, you're great, you would never tell a lie, you would never be untrustworthy, you would never let anybody down, when in fact you just did lie, or you were just untrustworthy, or you just did let somebody down, and you don't realize it because you don't want to acknowledge it. So someone tells you that, and you're immediately open. Wouldn't that be amazing? And there's no false ego. It's just you want to learn how to improve yourself, and you're completely open to that. Wouldn't that be amazing way to live? Well, what I'm saying is, if we want to progress in life, if we want to improve in any aspect of our life, whether it's our occupation, whether it's our marriage, whether it's our relationship with other devotees, with our spiritual master, our service, developing better qualities, it's essentially important to be in this mood to want to improve ourselves to such a degree that if someone came to us and said, I see that you do this and I think it's going to be harmful, or I see that it is harmful for you. And you say, sit down, tell me about this. I want to know more about it. You're completely interested in learning about your fault. Wow. Who's like that? Tell me about my fault. I want to hear more about my fault. I want to hear more about my fault. Why? Why? Because I want to improve myself. I'm so interested in improving myself. There was a nice story I read maybe 6 months ago. And there's a world famous motivational speaker, self-development guru. And he said something that was inappropriate in his workshop. He does workshops like seminars like 10,000 people. He's huge. And he said something about gay people that was inappropriate. Although it was inappropriate, what he said, he didn't mean what people thought he meant. But it got back to him, and he made a public apology about what he said, and I shouldn't have said this, and so forth. And the reason I became aware of it is because somebody had used him as an example. Said, look at this person. He actually lives what he teaches. That he made a mistake, it was pointed out, he immediately acknowledged it, he immediately apologized, he immediately not only acknowledged it, but followed his own teachings to do something to remedy. So to make up for it, or whatever damage was created, to do something, to put some soothing balm on the damage. And so this person was using him as an example of someone who has high levels of integrity. So it was pointed out, and immediately he accepted it and he dealt with it. And the reason is that this person has dedicated himself to improving himself and others. So because he was so dedicated to improving himself, he could immediately acknowledge a fault. And I've noticed this with people who want to improve themselves. They're so interested in learning about how to improve themselves that they're extremely open to understanding how they can improve themselves, whether it comes from their own realization, whether it comes from reading a book, someone's pointing out these are defects that people have or mistakes people make, or they have a coach and the coach is telling him, you need to do this and stop doing that, or just their husband or wife or friend. They're anxious to learn. Now, to learn about their own defects. So wouldn't that be a great way to live? But not only that, you're anxious to learn. Okay, tell me. I'm anxious to learn. Step one, exactly how it is. Tell me how it is exactly. And you have the objectivity and the detachment to be able to see it as it is. No, it's not like that. I really don't do that. And you don't go into denial. And you're like, tell me how it is. And you're trying to understand it, that this is what you do. Wouldn't you like to marry somebody like that? Where you could just say, dear, when you do this, it really bothers me because, you tell me you're going to be ready at 6, but you're never ready. You're always a half hour late, and then sometimes when we come late, I'm faulted because I promised to be on time, and your spouse is, you're right. Do I do that? He said, yeah, you do it all the time. Well, how does that look? And say, well, it's 5 to 6, and you say you'll be ready at 6, but you can't get ready in 5 minutes. You're like, you don't realize. And I'm very conscious of time, and you're not. You said, really? You say, yeah, you're not conscious of time. 6 means 6:30 to you, but to me 6 is 6. And it's like, tell me more. And say, well, this time you did it, and that time, like, really? But if someone's not in that consciousness, they'll say, everybody does that, or just, I'm slow, and that's just how I am. And they'll have like 108 excuses, isn't it? So wouldn't it be nice to be married to somebody? You can just tell them, they're like, yeah, you're right. Can you help me? That'd be fantastic, right? But wouldn't it be nice to have a boss like that, or an employee like that, or a friend like that? Wouldn't it? And isn't that what humility means, ultimately, to be self-aware? And so, to do step one, face it, we have to be somewhat detached and willing to be objective about who we are. Solely because, where do we get the power to do that? Because we're so anxious to improve ourselves. And we know if we don't listen, if the false ego gets in the way, if we can't be detached enough to listen, then what happens? I carry that problem with me my whole life, and I suffer. And because I want to improve, I actually want to become aware of my problem. So then you could say, well, if we're going into denial, then do we really want to improve ourselves? Or is it just that we want to keeping an image is more important than improving ourselves? And I think in many cases it's true. Having the image is more important than self-improvement. And we know, a lot of us, we are trapped in this image game that, we want people to think we're nice and we're good devotees and we have good qualities. So especially the people that you want to think you're nice, if they point out a fault, that's like a horror movie for you. You're just like, but this is the person I thought respected me so much, and now they're pointing out this fault. Rather, wouldn't it be nice to be in this consciousness of, thank you, that's so helpful. Tell me more about it. Wouldn't that be amazing to be in that consciousness? But that's where we need to be. Another thing I think is interesting, and maybe you have experience, you're reading a book and it's pointing out, let's say, a problem, an anartha. And you're reading, you're thinking, I don't have that anartha, that doesn't relate to me. When in fact it does. It's talking about you and your challenge, and you're thinking either it doesn't relate to me, or you're thinking, oh, I can't do anything about that. That's too high, that's asking too much. I can't do anything about it. Both are false. When you're more in the mode of improvement, you'll look at that and you'll say, okay, that's a stage way above me, but what can I do now from where I'm at to get one step closer to that stage? That's how you'll think. You think, what? You'll be so much in the mood of self-improvement. So people who are in this mood of self-improvement, it's like they have they're just more keenly tuned in, and their false ego has been tuned down to allow this information to get in, and then because they're so keenly desiring to make progress, this second stage, in which for most people stage 2, where you have to feel it, there's tons of resistance between stage 1 and 2. It's like, okay, there's tons of resistance to stage 1, but there's more resistance for most people when you're going into stage 2, because now you're going to have to allow yourself to experience it. But stage 2 is affecting stage 1, because although stage 2 is necessary, sometimes it's combined with stage 1, and because I don't want to feel it, I don't want to listen to it, so I go into denial mode. No, it's not true. Because I know if I listen to it, I'm going to start experiencing stage 2 while I'm still in stage 1. But stage 2 is you fully embrace it. Now, let me give you an example from our forgiveness workshop. We do an exercise where I ask the devotees, I say, I want you to feel what your resentment feels like, and I want you to come up with an analogy of what it feels like. So just allow yourself to feel the pain, whatever it is, feel it. And I want you to be conscious of where in your body you're feeling it, or where around your body, because sometimes you can feel it in your shoulders or your stomach or your heart, or you'll feel it on your head, or you might feel it over your whole body, but sometimes you'll feel it surrounding you, or your whole universe. You just feel like the whole world is crashing in on you. So I'd ask the devotees, feel it, and then come up with analogies. What does it feel like? It feels like the whole world's crashing in on me, or it feels like my neck is tied up with a chain to a pole and I can't move, whatever it is, right? So it's pretty intense, as you could imagine. It's a pretty intense part of the workshop, because it's all about feeling it. And we've already done the exercise where they explained to the person, to their partner who plays the role of the person they're trying to forgive, how they feel. So they've already gone into the emotion. But now they're going more deeply into the feel it process. Face it, fully face it, embrace it. This is how you feel. Just acknowledge it. You need to acknowledge this to move on to the next stage. To be able to deal with a problem, you have to be able to feel it, not run away from it. Because if you run away from the feeling, you won't be able to deal with it. You just can't. You can't move on to the third stage. You'll close up. Every time you think about dealing with it, you'll go back to this emotion that you don't want to experience. Whereas if you allow yourself to experience the emotion, you work through it. And then you get the emotion out, and you get it, you get through it. So now it's not hard. The emotion is not so intense, or it's not so difficult to experience the emotion. But my point is, after we do this exercise, I ask the devotees, or ask the participants, did you realize that it felt this way? Did you realize you were carrying this feeling with you, and the feeling is very heavy, very burdensome? And everybody says, no, I didn't realize it was this heavy. So we don't, because we're not used to facing the feeling, because we want to avoid the feeling, then we don't realize how bad we feel. And nobody wants to feel bad. And intuitively, we think if I feel bad, things will get worse. But the reality is, if you allow yourself to feel it, you'll move through that bad feeling. You'll kind of rid yourself of that bad feeling. Because now you finally faced it. Okay, I was a failure. I failed in my marriage, or I failed in my relationship, or I failed my guru. Or even a guru, I failed my disciple. Or as a temple president, I failed my congregation. Or as a devotee, I didn't follow my vows, or I did, and you just don't want to feel it because the feeling is so bad, and you carry this burden with you. But if you actually allow yourself to feel it, you work through it, and you start to relieve this negative emotional energy by feeling it. You just allow yourself to feel it, and it kind of purifies. You work through it, and now once you've faced it whole on, then you're able to deal with it because you're not afraid to face it anymore, because you completely allowed yourself to feel your failure, or whatever it was, your fault or your mess up. But the key element, I believe, at least from my experience and what I've seen in other people, the key element is that if improving yourself and solving these problems within yourself is important enough for you, then you won't find, then the importance you give to developing yourself reduces your resistance. So you get to this point where you want to improve yourself so much, there's no resistance between any of those stages. Whereas when the false ego is big, there's all kinds of resistance. The resistance is the attachment to this image. I don't want to deal with this. Or the resistance, just general resistance to pain. This is painful, and that's why we don't solve problems, because they're painful. And that's why we don't acknowledge them as they are, because it's too painful to admit that's how it is. But if you don't acknowledge it how it is, you can't solve the problem, because then you're solving a problem that isn't, because you imagine it to be some way it isn't. So you can only solve a problem that isn't, which in most cases is either it's too much of a problem to solve, or there's no problem, I don't need to solve it, when in fact it's not too much of a problem to solve, and it is a problem, but you're denying it's a problem. And so you don't face it, you don't confront it, you make believe it's not a problem. Because it's so hard, it's so difficult to experience that reality of the... But when you really want to improve yourself, you realize, I have to go through these 4 processes. So you embrace them, and the resistance is just... it evaporates, because you just want to get through all 4 stages, because you know the quicker I get through the 4 stages, the quicker I will solve the problem. So my realization about this is you can actually come to a point, you can train yourself by going through this. You can train yourself that you could go through these 4 processes in like 3 minutes. Like every time somebody says you have a problem, while you're listening to the problem in your head, you're practically already, after they explain the problem and you've got it, and they're still talking, you're on stage 4 already. You see the problem, you've allowed yourself to feel it, you've got solutions in your head, and you're like, okay, can you stop talking? I'm ready to work on it. You got like the whole plan. You can move that process like so fast because you're so into improving yourself and you realize that the sooner I realize the problem, and the sooner I feel it, and the sooner I deal with it, and the sooner I work on it, the sooner I'm going to solve it. You get to this point where you're like the 3 minute, maybe we should write a book called The 3 Minute Problem Solver. And you go through this whole process in like 3 minutes. It's just so fast for you. And now your whole life it's like, it's so easy. If someone says you have this problem, it's like, yeah, okay. It's like, tell me about it. And great. And while they're telling you about it, you're feeling whatever feelings are, your feelings of failure or whatever connected with it. And you're like, hey, what if I do this? You think that would be a good idea? And you're coming up with solutions. And I said, yeah, and you could do this. Okay, all right, I'm going to start working on this. You're like in 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, you've gone through all 4 steps. But if we're not in the mood if we're not really in the mood to improve ourselves, what happens? Step 1, we go into denial. No, that's not really the problem. Or maybe we'll acknowledge the problem, but we won't get to step 2 because we won't be able to face it. It's just too debilitating. I can't face that. I'm like that. That's so painful to feel how much I let myself down into this other person. We can't work through the feeling. And as I said, if you can't work through the feeling, you can't get to the point where you start thinking of solutions, because you're thinking of a solution to a problem which you're not allowing yourself to feel. You have to be able to feel that emotion. Otherwise, that emotion is going to block you from being able to work on it, because the emotion is too painful to even sit around and think about the solution. Because then think about the solution means you're acknowledging that you failed, that it's a big problem. And you have to be able to experience that emotion of failure, that I failed in this area. But when you allow yourself to experience it, what happens is the intensity of that emotion dissipates. And that's why you can work through it. Because once you've experienced it, it's just, everything is real for you now. You've experienced the emotion as it is, you've acknowledged the problem as it is, and so you can work on it now. But if you don't acknowledge the emotion as it is, excuse me, you're not yet ready to work. So I've kind of been looking at your questions as we've been going on, and noticing that some of you are saying things like, what if a person points out a problem and I don't agree with it, or what if I don't have the self-esteem to work on it? And I'll go through that, but my answer, at least my realization, is that beyond self-esteem and beyond the validity, or how if you think this person knows what they're talking about, let's not deal with that for a moment, but beyond that, let's deal with what's fundamental. And I think the fundamental ingredient to this process is your own willingness, and especially your eagerness to embrace the changes that are necessary and to do the work that's necessary. Because a person who wants to improve themselves will actually want to find out from other people what they need to improve. They'll want to. That's where they'll live. So when someone tells them, immediately they're open to it. So I think that's super important. Now you might say, but if you have low self-esteem, you can't do that. That may be true. But my point is, if you want to improve yourself, then you're going to have to do whatever you have to do to overcome whatever it is that's blocking you from being able to acknowledge the problem in a way that you can face it and deal with it and then do it. That's the key, because what's the use of facing it if you don't do the other steps? If you're not willing to. And so a person with low self-esteem is going to have tremendous difficulty on step 2. But if they have low self-esteem, step 1 and step 2 are therapeutic, because that's what they need to do. A person with low self-esteem has to be able to acknowledge, fully embrace the problem without destroying themselves, without saying, I'm the worst, Okay, you're going to say that because you have low self-esteem. So you have to go into step 2. Okay, how do you feel? I feel like the worst person in the universe. Allow yourself to feel that. Allow yourself to feel that emotion. Work through it. Because as you experience that emotion, the intensity of the emotion will leave you. And you'll just you'll work through it and you'll be able to go to the third step. So even if you have low self-esteem, this process will purify you if you can do it. And I will recognize that if you have low self-esteem, this is going to be harder. But I go back to my original point. If you have a problem that you're not working on, that problem is having negative effect on you. And the problem generally will not go away. You think it's going away because you're not dealing with it or you're suppressing the emotion. But generally speaking, in most cases, it doesn't go away and it's affecting you. So whatever it is, low self-esteem, this or that, the reality is these 4 stages you have to work yourself through. And so you have to get yourself into a consciousness to work through it. We all have to get ourselves into a consciousness to work through this. The person with low self-esteem just has more obstacles, but we all have obstacles. Don't we all have obstacles in recognizing that I'm like this and I could be like this? It would be better I'm like this. I've done things that are wrong that I'm unwilling to acknowledge until this point. Isn't that difficult? It's extremely difficult. So I don't think it's easy for anybody, but my experience is the people who want to improve themselves actually embrace this process. Okay, let's go. Let's do what we have to do to solve this problem, because I don't want to be this way, or I don't want to act this way anymore. So let me look at it. This is how it is. You're having a problem in your marriage. It starts with acknowledging this is the problem. No, that's not really the problem. It's not that bad. No, it is that bad. This is the problem. This doesn't work. This is dysfunctional. This has no future. Acknowledge it, that our relationship is not going to work if we keep going on this way. You don't want to acknowledge that. That's pretty pessimistic. No, we need to be optimistic. No, we need to be realistic, not pessimistic, optimistic. We need to be realistic. We need to be realistic about this is the situation. Because if we're not realistic about it, we can't fix it because we'll think there's nothing to fix. And that's such a huge problem when you think there's nothing to fix when there's something to fix. So that's hard for a lot of us, isn't it? Just to acknowledge the problem as it is, to admit this is how it is. Whether you have low self-esteem or not, it's hard to acknowledge because it means in some way I've failed. If you have low self-esteem, it's just harder. But if you don't have low self-esteem, it's still a challenge. But what I'm saying, if you try to adapt your consciousness so that you can go through these 4 very quickly, and you'll see in your life, you're just solving one problem after another. You're getting through all these problems because this is the product. This is how you do it. There's no way to solve a problem that you don't realize you have, that you haven't seen exactly as it is. There's no way to solve it unless you allow yourself to experience the emotion. And there's no way to solve it unless you sit down and think, what do I need to do to solve this problem? And there's no way to solve it unless you actually execute the plan. There's going to be resistance after you make the plan, because executing the plan may require that you apologize to someone or you admit you've made a mistake. And that could be really difficult. Or executing the plan may require that you have to behave in a way that you've never done that before. And it could be extremely difficult. So my point is that the more you want to improve yourself, the more you will dissipate those resistances. And then you'll get to this point where you can seamlessly go through these 4 steps just like that and without any resistance. Wouldn't that be amazing? Face it, feel it, deal with it, and do it. And you could go through those steps in 3 minutes. How could you go through those steps? You remove resistance. So the more resistance, the more difficult the process will be, the longer it will take. And if the resistance is too high, you'll never even get to step 1. And if you never get to step 1, then you have to carry all these problems with you, and then you have to deal with them in your next life because you didn't deal with them in this life, which is a fact. Purification, getting rid of anarthas, purification means you're supposed to do it in this life. So now I'm going to go back, and I think I may have addressed all your comments. And I didn't want to address them because I had a train of thought, and I was just looking. I think yeah. Hold on a second. Yeah, I have to make the mic lower. Sorry about that. It was too loud. So, Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar. So, I had a train of thought, and I saw some of the things you were thinking, which were off my train of thought, and I wanted to make my points because some of you were making, yeah, but what about this, what about that, and that would have thrown me off. Yeah, I think sorry the mic was too loud. I didn't read those comments. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivastava Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Yeah, so I think I make it, that's probably better. Now at the end of the class, we have the mic better, right? Krishna Govinda Hari Murari He Nata Narayan. That's how it should have been like this, right? Say it slowly, face it, feel it. There it is. Deal with it. Do it. Yeah. Write it down. This is extremely powerful. So Nirvana says, feel it seems to be an extra chaotic step in terms of avoidance with going through the steps. Can be very aware of problems. We don't like pain with dealing with it, but we experience pain not dealing with it. Yeah, exactly. The only way out of the pain is through the pain. Yeah. The only way out of the problem is through the problem. The only way out of the pain is through the pain. It's a necessary step. It's just, I've studied this and I've come up with these four based on, this is like years of study and years of practice. And in teaching the forgiveness workshop, this is what we do to deal with this forgiveness. You have to acknowledge it, then we allow devotees to experience it, deal with the emotions, and then we go through a process. We discuss the process and why we do things, and then we do it. And any resistance that comes in, then you won't follow the process. And the process, you can't have resistance because the process will work. So you have to overcome the resistance. So we all know about resistance. Dana is saying if the problem is an emotional trauma at the subconscious level, we still have to deal with it. And of course, that's like extremely difficult. But the point is, if you don't deal with it, it's still there. You may need someone who's expert to guide you through it, how to deal with it. But my experience is, again, the only way, suppressing it is not the solution. It has to come out and has to be dealt with. It has to be brought out into the air. And, there are ways you can deal with it. There are mindsets you can be in to deal with it. But if you go into it knowing that it has a positive outcome, like pulling your tooth that is killing you now has a positive outcome, it's easier to do it. Because it's like when you're getting massaged and they hit this painful spot and you're screaming and the masseur is saying, just let me work on it a little more because I need to get in there, this is the spot. So then the pain almost feels good in a sense because the pain is healing it. So that emotional trauma is actually healing you. And if you know that, and you've held it inside of you and you have to deal with it, then it's easier to deal with. But, there may be so many negative things that you've associated with an experience that are making it more traumatic, and those negatives don't need to be there, Like if there's an emotional trauma. Let's say you were abused when you were a child, right? And so children who are abused think there's something wrong with them, because why would anyone abuse a child unless there's something wrong with him? As adults, we know there's something wrong with the abuser, not with the child. The child is innocent, but the child doesn't know that. The child thinks there's something wrong. And now, if you were abused as a child and you thought something was wrong with you, that your adult would abuse you, then you grow up with this idea that something is wrong with me. But if let's say you're being facilitated to go through this trauma, the facilitator would say, I want you to go through this in the consciousness or awareness that there was something wrong with the person who abused you. There was never anything wrong with you. Because that will make it easier to go through the trauma. Because then, at least there won't be guilt there. There'll be pain that you were exploited, but there won't be the guilt because you've reframed it. So, if there's emotional trauma, you may need somebody to help you so you can reframe it in the proper way. But usually when you go through it, you start like when you cry, you relieve yourself. It helps. So, but if it's very, very serious, and it's something maybe you suppressed, you probably would want to go through it with someone, with a therapist or something who could guide you, so you wouldn't be damaged by doing it. Because remembering something, if it brings up the memory, it could shock you. But the point is the memory's there in your subconscious, and it's shocking you subtly. So if you can get it out, it'll stop shocking you for the rest of your life. It'll just shock you, for half an hour, but then it'll stop shocking you the rest of your life. And now it's not going to shock you for half an hour. It's just very little shocking you throughout your life. So that's the idea of facing it. So Sonar says, so humility helps us to face our problems because we're open to it. Yeah, humility, and then it creates detachment. And, it's not about my ego, it's about me solving the problem. So when solving the problem becomes important, especially if it's a spiritual problem, then what's important? It's about my relationship with Guru and Krishna. That's what's important. It's not my ego. It's not that I have to show off to the world and stay in Maya, and that's where I want to be. If I have to acknowledge a mistake, then I acknowledge it because that will help me. So therefore, it becomes very easy because that's what's important. Does that make sense? If your image is important, this is going to be really hard for you. Right? So humility, okay. Humility enables someone to be open to look at themselves and look at their mistakes and be able to work on it. So if we don't have sufficient humility, that first stage is going to be blocked by our ego, by our need to be right, excuse me, by our need to show the world that we're great. It's going to be blocked by that. So this is really important. What I'm telling you, this is not like something I realized when I was 19. This was like years and years and years of study and working on myself. And now you're getting it, and some of you are like in your 20s. I mean, if I got this information when I was 20, I'd probably be like the President of the United States right now. This is really powerful. Because there's all these things which are blocking us that we don't want to admit because of our pride, because of ego, because we're attached to our image. We don't want to look at it, we don't want to admit it. Whereas if we can admit it and start working on it, then things start progressing. And it's the same thing within a project, it's the same thing within a temple. And I'm sure you've seen this, like some temples have problems. And you're trying to explain, this is a problem, and leadership is saying, no, everything is fine. We've always done it this way, everything is good. And you're looking at it and thinking, it's not good. This is a problem. So many people aren't coming to our temples, or so many people are coming and they're not coming back because of this problem. And leadership is saying, no, it's not a problem. Now, leadership may not recognize, it may be a material thing, they just don't recognize it's a problem, or it may be an ego thing. They think, no, whatever we're doing is right. So we go back to that point. The value of a company is how quickly do you recognize a problem and how quickly do you solve it. So it's the same organizationally. Organizations have egos, and a lot of organizations do not want to admit their problems and their faults. They can't look at the situation realistically. And you will see that a lot of problems in our movement are because we didn't look at a situation realistically. We didn't just say, hey, look, everyone's optimistic, everyone's enthusiastic, but actually look what's happening on the ground. Not much. Oh, you're a pessimist, Prabhu. You're like raining on our parade. No, I'm just telling you what's happening. Have you ever seen that? Resistance to reality? Are you resistant to reality? Another t-shirt, Priya. are you resistant to reality? It's, organizations, there are business books about this, how organizations are resistant to the reality of their own faults and defects and shortcomings. So organization or person, it's the same. Organizational ego, which is usually the ego of the leaders of the organization. Individual ego. So somehow or other, what I'm trying to say, I don't know if I've said it, but I'll say it in another way. What I'm trying to say is, my hope from this class is to get you to a point where you actually want to finding your fault is good. You feel, I found a fault today. I'm so happy. I can work on something else to improve myself. Instead of blocking yourself out from finding fault, you're in a position where you love to find fault with yourself. You embrace it. When someone points out a fault, you thank you. That's so valuable. I'm so glad you did that. If there's anything else, tell me. This is so helpful. That's the consciousness we want to be in. If you're in that consciousness, you're going to realize so many things about yourself that you can improve. And you're going to find the other 3 steps are going to be much easier because you want to improve them. As I said, that reduces the resistance to go to the next stage. Because there's resistance between each stage. And the resistance between stage 1 and 2 is huge. But once you do it and you get into the mood of improving yourself and solving problems, you remove the resistance, so then the process happens quickly. If the resistance is there, from the time you realize now think about a problem you've had that you've realized you had, right? That you haven't started working on. And how long have you realized you've had that problem? So you're stuck in the resistance on one of those 4 stages. One of those 4 stages you're resisting, or if not all of them. Right? Or think about a problem you had that you didn't work on for 10 years. And think of what your life would have been like if you worked on it as soon as you realized you had it. Wow. So you realize how powerful these principles are and this practice is. Because if we can realize problems quickly and solve them quickly, our life is going to progress very quickly. And our Krishna consciousness is going to progress quickly. But if we don't acknowledge problems, or if we acknowledge them but we resist working on them, or we come up with a plan but we don't execute it, or we don't execute it for 10 years, do you see how our life's going to go? And I know you can all relate to this, and I know you're all thinking, yeah, I've been in a situation that was really bad because I was afraid to acknowledge how bad it was. I didn't want to admit to myself how bad it was, so I pretended it wasn't bad. But the fact was that it was bad, and it was eroding things in my life, but I couldn't face for various reasons. Like some devotees have told me, they failed in a certain area. So again, when they found themselves failing in that same area, they couldn't admit it because it hurt them so much that they originally failed that they couldn't acknowledge they're failing again. So they just denied that they're failing. They didn't, not even deny, they just put it in the closet, didn't deal with it. Just, they saw it wasn't working, but they couldn't just do step 1. Acknowledge it as it is. Look at it in reality. See it as it be real. See it as it is. That's the mantra for step 1. Be real. Get real. No, it's get real. So you see how powerful this can be? Probably, Guru Nishna says, we would need to be a Paramahansa to be that open to people telling us we have a problem. Of course, here it means everyone telling us. I have some good news for you, Guru Nishna, that I've attended workshops with 1,000 people who were doing this. And none of them were Paramahamsas. Actually, none of them were chanting Hare Krishna. And you could take 1,000 devotees and put them in a workshop, and maybe none of them will do this. So we're complex people. And we're not that Krishna conscious that we don't have much ego. So I would say the answer is a willingness to put the ego out of the way in order to improve. So you might ask, well, how is it that these 1,000 people, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, are willing to look at their faults because they want to improve themselves? It's my whole point. It's my whole theme. They want to improve themselves, and because they want to improve themselves, even though they're not Paramhansas or very spiritually advanced, they're willing to look at their faults. Now you might say, well, they're materially motivated to improve themselves, to achieve things. That may be true. But you can be spiritually motivated as much as they're materially motivated. But the point is, they're motivated, and because they're motivated, they're willing to look at it. And I'm working with these people. I did a course for 7 days, working shoulder to shoulder with people. This one, there were like 500 people from maybe 7 countries, all looking at themselves and looking at their shortcomings and talking about it. And it was amazing to watch. It was depressing to watch because I realized that many devotees wouldn't have functioned well in that environment where they had to be so thoroughly honest about themselves, and which was sad. It was sad to see other people doing it where some of our devotees are resistant to doing it. So I don't see it entirely as a Paramahansa level. Yes, humility is required, deflation of false ego is required, but what we understand is when there's a willingness, those things will automatically, your ego will get out of the way to the degree that you're willing. That's the point. Your ego will get out of, there's another t-shirt, your ego will get out of the way to the degree you're willing to advance. So your ego may be big. I think that's the question here. It's like, I have to be a Paramahansa, no ego. No, your ego's big, but with your willingness to advance, you'll get your ego out of the way. So you have a big ego, but you don't let that big ego get in the way. You're going to have a big ego until you're a Paramahansa. And as you advance, it'll get smaller, smaller, smaller. But let's say it's still this size, but you'll get it out of the way in order that you can hear and work on it. Hear what's wrong with you and work on yourself. So that's the point. If you take it that you have to be a Paramahansa, then you've misunderstood the main point of this course, because this course is for all of you who are not Paramahansas. So Sundari Radha is saying generally we get stuck, and I guess she meant one of those stages. So she goes on. We get stuck in thinking we have a problem and get trapped and really not facing it. Yeah, well you can't do the process unless you acknowledge number one. And believe me, if you look at your life, you will see number one, stage ones everywhere. Everything that's not going really well, go back and look at it realistically and you'll see, why is it not going really well? There's certain things I need to do personally, work on, that I'm not working on. And if I look at it realistically, I see it's a time management issue. I'm not managing my time as well. So then I face it, I feel it, and then I deal with it. Okay, what do I have to do? I make a plan and then I execute it. And then all of a sudden, now I'm able to do it. And it's just a little thing. It's not a big, I don't have all kinds of emotions around, I don't manage my time well. But there's some emotion, that I'm failing Prabhupada in some way because I'm wasting time that I could be used serving him. Okay, so I'm using that time to do other things, but there's something more important that needs to be done and I'm not doing. So, okay, that's a failure. I face it, not a big emotional issue, and then I work on it. So there are a lot of little things that we need to be dealing with. So you look at your life, whatever it is, your diet, your lack of exercise, lack of reading, bad japa, time management, whatever it is, just look at it as it is. This is what I'm doing, and this is what I should be doing, and this is why I'm doing the wrong thing and how it is and so forth. And you'll see there are lots of things out there you could improve. Believe me, lots of stuff. Is it not the unavoidable plight of the insecure person not to be able to face problems? It is, but I think that, okay, but let's look at it this way. The insecure person can't face the problem, so let's face the problem of the insecurity. Let that be number one. Okay, let's face your insecurity. Like, okay, Prabhu, I know you're insecure, so it's hard to face your problems, but let's face one problem, your insecurity, and let's look at that. And I think if we can get that person through these 4 stages about insecurity, then they can deal with all their other problems. Or we just make them realize your insecurity is a block from your ability to work this process. And so let's focus on enthusing that person to improve them, to want to improve themselves, to get their desire to improve themselves up to such a point that they'd be willing to do this process. So there's two ways you could deal with it. Don't allow your low self-esteem to get in the way of facing the reality. Because if you don't, you just acknowledge the problem, but this is what you tell, this is what you tell a person with low self-esteem. Acknowledge the problem without judgment. There should be no self-judgment. This is a problem. I'm lazy. Okay, don't make a judgment on that. It's just the problem. Don't judge it. Allow yourself to, what does it feel like to be lazy? Well, there's so many things I'm not doing. I'm procrastinating, etc. How does that feel? It feels horrible. It feels like I'm a failure. Okay, feel that. All right? But by not judging yourself on step one, at least you can evolve to step two. Okay, it's just accept the problem as it is without judgment. It's just, this is how it is. Don't judge it. Because if you judge it, it makes it harder to get into step two. That's an important point. That's so important. I'm going to write it down. Don't judge the problem. Just acknowledge it. You just acknowledge it as it is. You might say, well, if I acknowledge it as it is that a judgment? It's not a judgment unless you put a judgment on it. Okay, what's the problem? I ran the car, the oil light came on, I ran the car without oil, and I destroyed the engine. That's what happened. What would you acknowledge with judgment? I ran the car without oil, I destroyed the engine because I'm stupid. That's the judgment. Right? So you acknowledge the problem. So someone makes sure when they acknowledge the problem, there's no judgment there. Just acknowledge the problem without judgment. That's very important. Okay? Yes. Or inspire them to be more self-aware and help them realize everybody has all these problems. You're not the only one. But the difference between solving the problem and not solving it is that we have to be in the state of consciousness where we can face it without judgment and then go into the feeling process and allow ourselves then we can allow ourselves to feel that we're stupid, a failure anyway. But you'll work through that emotion so that that emotion will be cleansed, and then you can go to stage 3. Now without all that negative emotional stuff, you can just work on it. Because by feeling it, you'll get rid of it. That's the point. You'll work through these negative emotions by feeling them. They'll go away, and now you're like, okay, you got massaged, it was painful, but now it doesn't hurt anymore. So that emotional release is like massaging your emotions. Ow, 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 ow. But then you go to stage 3, and oh yeah, it feels better now. So in stage 3, you don't have this negative emotional baggage, because if you do, you can't really work on stage 3 or stage 4, because it's so painful, you just don't want to deal with it. So stage 2 is like massaging your emotions to enable you to relieve the pain associated with the problem so that you can deal with it on stage 3. So, Ananda says, I understand your point, but I have doubts if accepting and considering feedback from everyone in every situation is a good idea. It doesn't have to be necessarily always true. The way others see our problems. So how to know if it's really a problem, what other person is pointing out? What you say is true, but if you're willing and open, at least you're willing and open to consider it, and then that's ultimately your choice to acknowledge or not whether or not you have the problem. Now, sometimes you may not acknowledge it, and a year later you'll realize, actually, I do have the problem. Or maybe the person's just jealous or envious or critical. But at least I would say step 1 would be consider it. And then after considering it, if you think that's not accurate, I'm not really that way, that's just how they see me, that's fine. But the more detached you are and objective you are, the more you'll be able to understand if what they're saying is right. And number one, the more detached you are, at least you'll be able to listen. Okay, I'll thank you, I'll consider that. And even though in your mind you're thinking, they're wrong, I don't do that, you're listening. Do I do that? You're considering, why would they say I do that? Why would they say I'm this kind of person? I don't see myself that way. I don't recollect acting in ways they say I act. And even when they point it out, I don't think I was actually doing what they said I was doing. But at least you're open to it. That's the point. That's the big. Then he says, defense mechanisms often protect the psyche when a person is unable to cope with a problem. Yeah, exactly. But we need help in dealing with it. Yeah, some persons have deep trauma in their life, and it's really hard to deal with, but the problem is the trauma is affecting them. And if you learn how to deal with it and learn the mechanisms, rather than protecting yourself, but learn the mechanisms to purify yourself, then under the guidance of someone who is a professional, so that when severe negative emotions come up, they help you work through it, then that will help you tremendously. Radha says, why is it more easy? The word is easier. Why is it easier to solve the problems of others than our own issues? False ego. Because you don't have others' false ego, you have your own. The other reason is, and I think this relates to you in some recent problems you had, is just an attachment. Because when you're attached to something, you lose objectivity. So if you're attached to something and I say this isn't good, your attachment makes you think it is good. And your attachment makes you want to have it and hold on to it. And someone says, don't hold on to it, it's not good. You can't have objectivity anymore because you want it. It's like, let's say you're eating your favorite preparation. You're about to put it in your mouth and I grab your hand and I say, don't eat it. It's not good for you. And you're starving and it's your favorite preparation. Well, how difficult is it going to be not to eat it? Very difficult. Whereas if you're really into health and you're very objective about your eating and you only put things in your mouth that are healthy, if I say, stop, don't eat that, it's not healthy, you'll go, oh, thank you. Isn't it? But if you don't care what you eat and you're starving, you'll just push my hand away and you'll eat it. So if we're too attached to enjoying something or having something or not giving it up, how can we be objective about it? When someone says, this is a problem, I think you should give it up. And go back a stage, don't become attached to something if that something is not healthy, it's not good. So stage one, face it, that, when you're getting into situations, you want to look at them realistically. And if you don't look at them realistically, then you're going to have problems. And in a lot of relationships, that's what people do. I was just discussing on Saturday night with one of my godbrothers. And he was saying about relationships, how when you're with somebody, you feel really good with that person, it's a special feeling, you feel comfortable with them, you have a good time with them, you just feel really good with them. And you think, well, this is my soulmate, this is the person. Because you just feel good and comfortable and easy around that person, you feel special around that person. And you think, this is the person. And then we were talking about, the reality is, have you ever been with somebody and you're really good and you're really close, but then you get into another situation and you see another side of them, and they're dealing with stress and difficulties, or you see them in charge of a company and they're bossing people around and they're really unkind. But with you, just one-on-one, it's totally different. Or they're in a stressful situation, they can't deal with it and they're becoming nasty and so forth. And you're like, oh, I never saw that side of that person. Well, one of the wisest statements I've ever heard about finding a partner is, ask yourself the question, would I go into a business with this person? So liking this person and having a good time, that's completely different, or somewhat different, than going into business with that person. Yeah, I'd love to hang around and have fun with this, but go into business? No, I wouldn't go into, why? Well, I don't really trust them. Or they're irresponsible. Or they're not that capable. Or they just want to have fun. They don't want to do work. And you go, oh, and you want to marry that person. They just want to have fun and they don't want to work. and they're not responsible. And you want to marry? It's like, yeah. So you have to take step one. Look at the reality. When you're getting into a situation, you can apply step one also. Look at the reality of the situation. What am I getting into? But if you only go into it with this optimism, I just feel so good, I never felt this way before, that's half of the equation. But unless you look at the other half equation, okay, a relationship, a marriage is a business. Most of the time, it's not going to be having a good time. Most of the time, I'm going to be working, she's going to be working, we're going to be washing dishes, cooking, changing diapers, going to the bank, paying bills. That's what was going to dominate the relationship, not just going out and having fun. So if that other side which dominates the relationship, if this person is not the kind of person you want to do all that stuff with, that you would trust, and then why are you kidding yourself that this is your partner? So we go into situations and we're making decisions based on feelings rather than based on what's real. So it's the same problem. It's just you have to acknowledge it in the beginning. So Parananda says, I think only a person with healthy self-esteem can go through this process. If someone is oversensitive, is not able to accept feedback from others because he's taking everything too personally. I know people like that who are not able to accept. Yeah, that's true. So the purpose of this class, and you could send this class to anyone you think it would help, the purpose of this class is also to address people with low self-esteem so that they could go through this. So they could see how important this is, and they could see how important it is to lower yourself, to detach yourself enough to be able to acknowledge your problem. And if they could master these 4 steps, I think it would help be a solution to their low self-esteem. Because if they can master step 1 and 2, then they're ready to conquer the world. Dana says the relationship is important. Another problem is sometimes my own distorted mirror. Only love plus awareness heals. Yeah, that's true. So that means we should be careful when giving feedback, that it's not just our own issue that we're seeing in another person. Casey is all about self-development, meaning we should focus on our own problems and not pointing out problems of others. And usually, devotees are not eager to tell others what's wrong with them because it's not aligned with our philosophy. Only gurus, spouses, or close friends can give feedback. Yeah, that's true. But if you see somebody's walking off a roof and is about to fall off, either you have to tell them or you have to find somebody who they trust who can tell them. Or you just have to jump in front of them. So it depends how bad the problem is. But what you say is true. In general, we have to find people that can explain the problem to them. But sometimes we're the only one, and rather than let them kill themselves, we have to tell them. Carla says, a person once told me that we should be grateful when we find a fault in ourselves, because in that way we can work on it and improve. Also, that it's important to forgive ourselves for having the fault. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Forgive ourselves for having the fault instead of blaming ourselves. The more we know about the fault, the more we can work to find a solution for it. Also, not to overthink about it, because overthinking never helps. Instead, but find a strategy to be able to overcome it. Exactly. That's the process. Okay, I have a news flash for all of you listening. Today in the news I read that everyone has problems. So I'm sorry to inform you that your problems are not unique, you are not special, but the problems you have, everybody has, to one degree or another. And I hate to inform you that your problem is not worse than everyone else's. You're not special, and that your problem is worse. There are a lot of people who have it much worse, who are not destroying themselves about the problem, who are able to forgive themselves as human beings with problems. Now, once we accept that we're human beings and human beings have problems, you don't have to forgive yourself because there's nothing to forgive. So forgiving yourself is a false dilemma to start with. Because why do you have to forgive yourself for just being who you are? Now, if you go out and kill somebody, or you're a drunk driver and you kill somebody, yeah, that's a different issue. But to forgive yourself for being who you are, for having the same problems everyone else has, that's a false dilemma. You don't have to forgive yourself for that. You're just being human. And you're working on your problem. Why would you have to forgive yourself if you're working on a problem? Working on the problem is one of the best forms of self-forgiveness because you're actually working on it. What better form of self-forgiveness can you have than to work on the problem? So lack of self-forgiveness is, it's been like hammered into us when we were kids that we're not good enough. That's where it comes from. So you think you're uniquely fallen when you're just like everybody else. How do we feel, not get depressed or just carried away with it? Feeling fully can be exhausting because the only way I can answer this question is that you have to do stage 2 and allow yourself to feel. Whatever it is, okay, maybe Sonal you think, oh, I'm proud. All right, so how does that feel to feel proud? Just allow yourself to feel it. Do the experiment and see if that doesn't work you through those feelings in a way that those feelings no longer become obstacles to dealing with the problem. Just experiment with it and see, and that will answer your question by doing it. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to do it, but after this class, just allow yourself to feel whatever it is. Like I think in your case, you might say, I feel proud or envious or whatever, lazy. Whatever it is you feel you are, let's say proud. So what does it mean? How does that feel? How does that feel, when you're feeling proud? Where do you feel it? I feel it in my heart, but it's like a pain, so feel it. Just allow yourself to feel it and see what happens. Yeah, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance. Yeah, what I just said. But I think it's more important to realize you don't need self-forgiveness because there's nothing to forgive. You're just being human. So why do you have to forgive? Like in our forgiveness process, the highest stage of realization in the forgiveness process is there was nobody to forgive. It was just you thought something happened. But nothing happened. It was all perfect. It was all there for you to learn. So there's nobody to forgive. You don't have to forgive yourself. You're just being you. And you can improve yourself. That's all. Venerati. I just remembered I just remembered when I was a child, my mom used to tie my bad tooth with a piece of string into a handle of an open door. And then she would close it, and so the tooth would fall out. And so, oh my God. So it's easier to get rid of the painful tooth that way. So sometimes it's very good to speak to someone about the problem you're stuck in. That can help you get out of the pain faster. Yeah. Yeah, that was the process where you talk about, when you talk about the problem, talk about it, not just talk about it, but talk about it to get purified. That's the idea, to work through it. Or you could even talk about how bad the person was, but just once, just to, get the emotion out. Priyarani, once we decide to work on something or change or remain positive, how to remain motivated to keep going? But one of the ways to remain motivated, if you look at this process, just look at your life not doing this process. That just means I'm going to have all these problems that I don't deal with. And all these problems are going to be problems that are getting in the way of going further in every aspect of my life, in my Krishna consciousness, in my career, and in my relationships. Whereas if I work on these problems, my Krishna conscious career and relationships are going to skyrocket because I'm removing obstacles. So if you look at it in that way, why wouldn't you be motivated? Unless you just don't care about Krishna consciousness, you don't care about relationships, you don't care about your career. Yeah, then, go in a cave and chant 128 rounds a day. You're ready for renunciation. But since you care about spreading Krishna consciousness, associating with the devotees, eventually raising a family, serving your guru and so forth, then it's kind of a no-brainer that I need to be self-aware so that I can correct these things. I have a question of concern. Please guide me. A few of us devotees regularly kirtan service dedicated. Can you send me an email? Because I don't think that relates to this question. To this class. Send me an email and I'll answer it. I mean that after realizing that we fail to deal with it, sometimes we need, to forgive ourselves. Yeah. And, self-forgiveness is important. But I would like to bring you to the stage where you realize you don't have to forgive yourself because there's nothing to forgive, unless you've done something horrible. And even if you've done something horrible, then once you forgive yourself, then move on. Move past it, go forward. Erica says, thank you, so needed to hear this, that we all are struggling through life. That is normal to improve. Just had some realizations, came to the forest, and it came to my came to my inner, a lot of small trees, broken trees, fallen trees, dried trees, the same as we have, a lot of everything inside. We don't normally accept, but the forest is beautiful because it is everything we should accept. Our self, accept ourselves because the way we, through everything, made us who we are. Yeah, anyway, well, I always say, if Krishna accepts us, so why shouldn't we accept ourselves? That's such a paradox not to accept ourselves if Krishna does. So Priyarani decided to go to the cave. Implementing these 4 steps are way too difficult, troublesome. She's going to a cave. 128 rounds. Okay, when you get out of the cave, Priyarani, you still have to face the world again. Hare Krishna. Okay, we went almost 2 hours. Wasn't intentional, but please share this class. I think I could write a book about this. I think this will be a chapter in the new book. And this is kind of like the foundation to the forgiveness process. When I analyzed the forgiveness process, this is really what we're doing. And then I realized this is what you need to do for every problem. And I've done this. And like now in my life, I'll just give you a personal example in my life. If my wife talks to me and says, there's things that we could do to improve in this area or that area, or improve in our relationship. Years ago, I would just no, it's good enough. It's fine. We don't need to talk. But now I'm like, yeah, now I actually like it when she tells me all the things that we could do to improve. It's a totally different, my reaction is totally different. I'm completely open to it. So that's what I'm saying, is that if you get in the right consciousness, rather than as soon as someone says, you need to do this, and you push away, you'll be like, thank you, yeah, let's do this. Because the process now is easy for you. You don't have any resistance. So say, tell me, okay. Then you feel, yeah, I really failed with that, and it's easy to feel it. And okay, so what do we do? There's no resistance. You go right to the 3rd stage, like, boom, you're practically at step 3 after you hear the problem. And you're like, okay, so how do we work on it? And you're in the consciousness now where, because you want to improve, it's easy to change. You're no longer, this is the way I am, I can't change. You're not in that mood anymore. You're in the mood of, to improve means I have to change. That's what it means. And so you're very fluid. You're kind of seamless in this process. So if you can get seamless in this process, fantastic. So really what you want to look at is, as a closing, you want to look at your resistance. Look at your resistance, because that's where you're going to get trapped up. Look at your resistances. That's where you're going to get trapped up. And so if you can learn to overcome or dissipate or reduce your resistance, then it's fantastic. You'll have an easy time, much easier time, and you'll avoid so many problems. Okay, thank you very much. I'm totally spaced out. I had the devotee said he wanted to talk to me at 12:15 today, and I wrote him back. I said I have class at 12:15 because I was on European time, and that's when we were giving this class. And then I was chatting my rounds this morning, and about 6:25, I realized, I said, "Oh my God, it's at 6:15." Sorry I was late, but anyway, we did it. And for those of in Australia, I kept you up late. Sorry, it's 10:30 in Australia, but we'll remember next week. Actually, yeah, if I can do it next week, I can do it next week. Okay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.